The Bible tells the story of a stunningly beautiful queen who was called to risk her life to save her people at a critical time in Jewish history. The story of the Bible hero Queen Esther should give all of us courage to step up and do what we are called to do, no matter what the risk. Esther was not born into a life of privilege. Her parents had both died, and she had been taken in by an older cousin, Mordecai, who had done his best to raise her well. A large part of the Jewish population were living in exile during Esther's time. Decades earlier, they had been forced to leave Judah, and many decided not to return with Ezra to Jerusalem. Esther and Mordecai lived in Shushan, the capital city of Persia. Mordecai was a royal official and was able to provide a respectable upbringing for young Esther. He treated Esther as his own daughter, instilling her with strong values. When Esther became a young woman, she was picked based on her great beauty to be part of a beauty pageant of sorts, kind of like a Miss Persian Empire sort of thing. But this pageantry was not about bragging rights on social media. Steve Harvey was not there to MC this pageant and incorrectly announce winners. The circumstances around the beauty contest were unique, to say the least. King Ahasuerus, commonly known as Xerxes I, had ordered the contest in an attempt to find a replacement for his wife, Queen Vashti. The queen had humiliated him publicly by refusing to appear before drunken guests of his feast. So he got rid of her and began the search for a replacement. Esther chapter 2, verse 8 and 9 says that, "So it was, when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian for the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor, so he readily gave her beauty preparations, beside her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women." When it was her turn to go before the king, Esther made sure she quizzed Haggai on the king's tastes before going on to see him. She carefully followed Haggai's advice and what to wear, paying close attention to detail. All the effort paid off. Esther chapter 2, 15 and 17 tells us this. "Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti." This early victory of Queen Esther's already qualifies her as a biblical hero who worked hard and did her best no matter what the task. In charming Haggai and later winning the approval of the king, Esther showed that soft power and people skills can and should be used effectively in God's service. So often people assume the subtleties in how we treat people don't matter. The little details of making others feel appreciated, respected, and celebrated are frequently ignored in our modern society, where everyone is just focused on looking out for number one. The irony, of course, is that a self-centered approach where you ignore everyone else's has a way of backfiring. If you are self-absorbed and unwilling to help others, it's unlikely they will fall over themselves trying to help you. Esther would never have become Queen Esther without her soft touch, her ability to understand others and appeal to them in a positive way. Queen Esther's outer beauty was matched by an inner strength that won people's confidence. As luxurious as palace life could be for the newly named Queen Esther, she never forgot her roots. Queen Esther was a woman of integrity who didn't let the glitz of the palace tarnish her ideals. 5 years after her coronation, Esther was tested in a major way. Her husband's chief advisor, Haman, hated her cousin Mordecai because, as a Jew, Mordecai refused to bow down to him. A very proud man, Haman decided to punish Mordecai by getting King Xerxes to sign a decree that basically ensured all Jews in the kingdom would be massacred. Sheltered from the outside world, Queen Esther had not heard the news of the decree and was shocked to find out that her cousin Mordecai was sitting in sackcloth and ashes, a way to show that he was mourning. Mordecai sent Esther a message letting her know of the decree allowing non-Jews in the empire to slaughter Jews on a given date. He asked his queen cousin to intervene on her people's behalf. At first, Esther was hesitant to meddle in the situation because she didn't think it was her place to do so. The king had not asked to see her in a month, and strict palace protocol dictated that anyone who approached the monarch uninvited would be killed unless he had out his golden scepter to the person. Plus, nobody in the palace knew that she was Jewish. Put yourself in Esther's shoes. Would you want to expose yourself and disrupt the luxurious, comfortable life you had grown accustomed to? A lesser person would have looked for an easy way out. But Mordecai reminded Esther that she had a duty to her people. In the book of Esther chapter 4, starting in verse 13, we witness the important conversation between Mordecai and Esther. It says, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Verse 15, when Esther told him to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Esther knew how to remain faithful under pressure. She listened to her cousin's wise words and began to strategize. And if she was to make a successful ask of King Xerxes, she would need a virtually foolproof game plan. Her monarch husband was unpredictable at best, and missteps could cost Esther her life. The queen made painstaking preparations for her visit to the king. She made sure she looked her best and asked for the prayers of her people. She was committed to carry through with her mission. Esther 5 tells us what happened next. Starting in verse 1, we read, "Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner courts of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, 'What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half my kingdom.' So Esther answered, 'If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him.'" As you can see, Esther was a careful diplomat. She resisted blurting out the real reason for her visit. She would not yet reveal that she was Jewish and that Haman was trying to kill her people. Esther was patient and cool under pressure. She used the moment to instead invite the king and Haman to a banquet at her residence that night. At the event, Esther wined and dined both King Xerxes and Haman, but she still resisted making her big ask. Instead, Esther used the feast to warm up the king and strengthen his confidence in her. She needed her request to go flawlessly and was working hard to gain every advantage. The dinner worked like a charm. The king was delighted by his beautiful wife and was now in a position to repay Esther for her kindness in hosting the dinner. Esther held off a little bit more and asked both men to return for another lavish dinner the next day. When the two returned the following day, the hero queen knew what she had to do, and she did it. She pleaded for her life as a Jew as well as for the lives of her people. She pointed out Haman was behind a deadly plot to annihilate her. Haman did not know what had hit him. He had been completely outplayed by the heroic Queen Esther. Panicking, he fell at the queen's couch to beg for his life. This turned out to be a horrible decision, as furious King Xerxes interpreted Haman's actions as an advance on Esther. The angry king had Haman impaled on a stake. The vengeful Haman had set up to kill Mordecai. The same stake Haman set up to kill Mordecai is what the king ordered he be impaled. With Haman gone, things just got better. The king promoted Mordecai to take Haman's place as his chief advisor. And to counteract the awful attacks Haman had planned against the Jews, a new decree gave permission for the Jews to defend themselves against attackers and punish aggressors. God had led powerfully in Esther's life, and because of this hero's courage, strategic mind, and faithfulness, an entire population was saved. Who knew whether Esther had come to the kingdom of Persia for such a time as this? God did. What kind of inspiration can you and I draw from the story of hero Queen Esther? How can we learn from her patience, her tact, and her faith in God? Are you faced with a big problem in your life that seems to have no easy answer? Are you afraid to take a big step of faith because it may backfire? Let the story of Queen Esther show you what can be done. Follow her example as a woman of action and identify how best to take little steps in the right direction. Just as Queen Esther was able to save her people by carefully making a series of small, well-calibrated moves, you too can be deliberate and intentional about doing what needs to be done to better your community and the lives around you. And remember, there is a huge difference between strategizing for good, like Esther, and scheming for evil, like Haman. Remember to use strategic thinking for the benefit of others and for the glory of God. Being calculating and crafty is selfish, and it has a way of coming full circle against you. Haman was executed on the same stake he had set up to kill his enemy Mordecai. We should all see Haman's life story as a cautionary tale of what can happen when we let pride, jealousy, and evil plotting take over our thoughts and our lives. Choose Queen Esther's path of selfless service instead. During World War II, Johann Hendrik, the son of a Seventh-day Adventist minister, fled from Paris as the Nazi forces occupied the city. He ended up in Lyon, a city in an unoccupied area of France. While there, he created a Dutch Paris, an underground network, headquartered at a textile factory he had set up in Lyon. Dutch Paris became one of the most successful underground networks involved in smuggling people persecuted for their faith or race and other reasons important to the Nazis. The escape route set up by this godly man, Wilder, and his network, it saved more than 1,000 people, including 800 Dutch Jews and more than 112 downed Allied pilots. Widener was arrested twice. He was beaten and tortured, but he survived the war and eventually moved to the United States. Widener was awarded the United States Medal of Freedom with Gold Palm. The UK made him an honorary officer of the Order of the British Empire, and he was made an officer in the Dutch Order of the Orange Nassau. The French government awarded Widener with the Croix de Guerre and Médaille de la Résistance and the Légion d'honneur. The Belgian government decorated him as an officer of the Order of Leopold. In 1993, at the opening of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., Widener was one of the 7 people selected to light candles recognizing the rescuers of Jews during the war. The Israeli government named Widener as a Gentile designated as a righteous among the nations at Israeli National Holocaust Memorial, Yad Vashem. At the memorial, a grove of trees was planted in Widener's name on the Hill of Remembrance along the Avenue of the Righteous. Widener clearly was called at a specific time in history to specific task of saving others. And he was faithful in stepping up, risking his life to save others. In this way, Widener followed in the steps of Queen Esther, who carefully yet deliberately stepped into the leadership role God had in store for her. Like Esther, Widener did not make excuses for himself, even if that would have made for a safer existence. He knew what had to be done, and rather than let a powerful enemy destroy people he had the power to save, Widener did what he could do at the time it was needed. 2,000 years ago, a young charismatic Jew started a spiritual revolution that would turn the world upside down and offer a way to escape sin and suffering to live with God forever. In order to save us, Jesus put absolutely everything on the line. He knew he had been called to do something unique. In fact, he had volunteered to do it because of his great love for us. Unlike Queen Esther and Johann Widener, Jesus had to die to accomplish his rescue mission. But the Son of God didn't flinch. He willingly died for you and for me. The good news is that after 3 days, the greatest hero ever, he rose again, and now he invites us to accept his salvation and to embrace the specific mission he has given to each of us. Just as he called Queen Esther to do a specific task at a specific time, Jesus calls you and me to share his love and his message of salvation through Jesus. It's time to stand up and be counted. Are you up to the challenge?